Welcome, Sundry readers! I hope you enjoy today's story. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Happy listening! Stories from the Growing Years by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 1, Unexpected Journey. The old porch swing squeaked lazily as my friend Sarah Jane and I sat looking out across the fields. Clouds building up in the west gave promise of rain before nightfall, but the day had been pleasant.
June 23rd again,
Sarah Jane said.
Mabel, do you think you'll live to see your 85th birthday?
No,
I admitted.
There are times I don't think I'll make it to my 25th. I don't worry about you, though. I know you'll never go off to heaven and leave me to run my own life.
Of course not, Mabel. I have a strong sense of obligation.
You have that,
I thought as I looked at her fondly. We had been through a lot together, Sarah Jane and I. From the time our mothers had placed us in the same cradle while they sewed or worked together, there had not been much distance between us. We played together, sat together through grammar school, and shared a room through high school. Now we were raising our children side by side. Sarah Jane's thoughts were apparently following the same path as mine.
We've shared a lot of experiences, haven't we?
She said.
I think I might have asked the Lord to sidestep some of them if I'd known what they were going to be, but overall, we have a good life.
We really do,
I agreed.
I suppose some people think it's boring living in a small town, but we've had our share of excitement without even getting out of the state.
We almost got out of the state 2 weeks ago,
Sarah Jane reminded me.
We should have taken advantage of the opportunity.
Somehow it didn't seem like an opportunity at the time, I replied. It was more like a calamity.
Our husbands were still teasing us mercilessly about this latest escapade, which began at the wedding of our friends, Colleen O'Shea and Lorenzo Handy. As Colleen had hoped, they were the first to have a wedding in our new church in North Branch, Michigan. I thought it was terrible that the old church was blown away in the tornado, Colleen said as we worked together on the flowers. But now it seems like a gift from God. I never dreamed of being married in such a beautiful place. I paused and looked around the little church that my husband, Len Williams, pastored. It was plain, as were all the country churches, but I wouldn't have traded it for any other I had ever seen. This was the church I attended the year I came to North Branch as an 18-year-old schoolteacher. The young minister was the son of the school board president, and before 2 years had passed, I realized that all my reasons for never marrying a preacher were no longer valid. Were you married in the old church, Mabel? Colleen's voice brought me back to the present.
No, I was married at my family's home. It was an outdoor wedding under the trees in our yard.
I wish I could have been there, Colleen sighed. I've never been to an outdoor wedding.
I wish you had been too, I said. Wouldn't that have made people sit up and take notice?
You can say that again.
We turned as Sarah Jane entered the church with an armful of ferns and baby's breath.
You two look so much alike that even I was confused when Colleen moved to town, and I've known Mabel all my life.
The distant rumble of thunder reminded us that we must finish our job quickly and close the church if we were to get home before the storm broke. Tomorrow will be clear and beautiful, Colleen predicted cheerfully. And if it isn't, it will be rainy and beautiful. Len came in at supper time just as I was putting Alma to bed. I had been patting her back and optimistically hoping she would drop off. But when she heard Len's voice, her head bobbed up and she turned a cheerful grin in his direction.
Good,
Len said.
I can hold her for a few minutes.
That's exactly what she was planning,
I said.
Bring her out into the kitchen so we can talk while you rock.
Ma says she'll keep the babies tomorrow since both you and Sarah Jane will be busy with the wedding,
Len told me.
She's been looking forward to this.
That's sweet of her, but I hope she hasn't taken on more than she can handle. One baby does me in.
June 6 was clear and beautiful, as Colleen had predicted. People began to gather early for the morning wedding. Since Lorenzo Handy could neither hear nor speak, the service was to be in sign language as well as spoken. Signing was another blessing Colleen had brought into Lorenzo's life the year before.
I know it isn't customary, she had told Len, but we would like to face the congregation when you marry us. They won't hear Lorenzo's voice when he repeats the vows, but they can watch his hands.
I never understood why people wanted to see the minister anyway,
Len said.
I'd much rather they'd look at you.
Sarah Jane and I stood up with Colleen, and Lorenzo was attended by Sarah Jane's husband, Thomas, and Jerome Grayson. Len surprised the happy groom by signing the questions he asked them.
You couldn't have given me a nicer gift,
Lorenzo told him later.
I feel as though I have a new life by being able to communicate without writing everything down.
Myra Grayson had baked a gorgeous wedding cake, and the reception table on the church lawn was loaded with food that the church and community ladies had provided.
There's enough food here for all of North Branch,
Colleen said. All of North Branch is here. Elizabeth Lawton came up beside us and hugged Colleen. Your dress is the perfect color for you. I wish I could wear lavender. Did Augusta make it for you?
Yes.
Colleen nodded happily. I told her I wanted one as beautiful as the one she made for Mabel. She fingered the soft, silky material. I've never had anything this nice. She wouldn't let me pay either. She said it was a wedding gift.
Augusta is a dear,
I said.
She'd like to have you think she's pretty stern stuff, but we know better.
I half listened to the conversation around me as I thought back to my first encounter with Augusta. Sarah Jane and I were just out of school and ready to begin our first year of teaching. I in North Branch and she in nearby Edenville. Augusta felt that Mr. Williams had made a serious error in hiring a giddy girl for the school and was not reluctant to say so. But before the year was out, I had reason to be thankful for Augusta more than once. Not only was she straightforward and outspoken, she was fair and compassionate. I looked at Elizabeth, standing beside her. I would also consider Elizabeth Lawton one of my greatest victories in life. What began as a spiteful dislike had, by God's grace, become a treasured friendship. Colleen looked at us seriously. Isn't it amazing how God sets each person on a path and then directs them so that they meet and go on together? You do believe he arranges that, don't you?
Absolutely,
Sarah Jane exclaimed.
He's the only one who could take this motley assortment and make something wonderful out of it. Though why he chose to place that one on my path, I haven't discovered yet.
We turned around to see who was coming, and Elizabeth groaned.
Hudson Curtis, I don't think there's any reason he needs to cross my path again. There's someone over there I need to speak to.
She disappeared as Hudson, with Widow Moore in attendance, halted beside us.
Good morning, Mabel. Sarah Jane. You remember Addie Moore, my wife-to-be?
We nodded, and Hudson turned to Colleen.
That was a lovely wedding, Colleen. I thought it would be nice if I could meet your folks.
They aren't here, Hudson. It would have cost too much for the whole family to travel this far, so Lorenzo and I are going to Chicago to see them.
Oh, that's nice. You will be back in time for our wedding next month, won't you?
There's no way in the world I'd miss it, Hudson, Colleen replied solemnly. After all, it could have been... Hudson looked alarmed and turned pale. Scheduled before we returned, Colleen finished.
Yes,
Hudson mumbled.
We'll see you later then. Come, Addie, we must be going.
They hurried off before poor Addie had time to open her mouth, leaving a semi-hysterical Sarah Jane struggling to keep from laughter.
You weren't really going to say it could have been my wedding, were you? She gasped.
Why, how could you think such a thing? Colleen grinned. But if I had, it wouldn't approach what he has coming for what he did to all of us. I'm saving up my ammunition for a more appropriate time. And speaking of time, I should remind Lorenzo that we must be ready to leave on the 5 o'clock train. Wasn't it wonderful of Jerome and Myra Grayson to give us this trip as a wedding gift? Lorenzo is a valued employee and a friend of Jerome, I replied. Without Lorenzo's help, they might never have known the truth about the lumber mill fire.
Lorenzo told me about that, Colleen said with a nod. Who would have thought that a town this small could have so much excitement? She looked around the yard at our friends standing around in little groups. At least there hasn't been any heart-stopping action today, except my wedding, of course.
The day isn't over yet,
Sarah Jane commented.
Now why did you say a thing like that?
I demanded when Colleen had left.
You're the one who doesn't believe that there are any fates to tempt, Mabel. What are you worried about?
It's not fates with you,
I said.
It's cause and effect. Are we going to see them off? Ma Williams said we had the whole day.
At that moment, Augusta appeared with a wicker basket and set it on the table. Food, she announced. It's a long trip to Chicago. This will keep them going until they get there. Will you see that they get it?
Sure, Augusta. They'll appreciate it, I know.
Sarah Jane eyed the basket.
That will keep them going for as long as they stay in Chicago,
she guessed.
In fact, they could open a concession on the train.
The Graysons, the Gages, Elizabeth, and Rebecca Handy were among those gathered at the station to see the newlyweds off. Did they get the rest of the cake to take to her family? Myra asked. I wish they could have seen it before it got cut.
Yes, it's here,
I answered.
It still looks wonderful.
I gazed at all the baskets and bundles sitting around as we waited.
It appears that all their other earthly belongings are here, too. How will they ever get on the train with all this?
We'll help them,
Sarah Jane said.
If we each carry a few things, it will only take one trip. One trip is all you'll have time for,
Len said.
The train doesn't stop here for long. We'll go and check on the things that go in the baggage car.
He and Thomas disappeared around the back of the station just as the whistle blew announcing the arrival of the Père Marquette to Chicago. There was a flurry of goodbyes and hugs, and Sarah Jane and I grabbed some bundles and followed Colleen and Lorenzo onto the nearest car. This one is full, Colleen announced. We'll have to go through to the next. The huge locomotive puffed and snorted, and the conductor called, All aboard! As we stashed their packages above an empty seat.
Isn't this exciting?
Sarah Jane said.
Don't you wish you were taking a long trip?
Suddenly, the car lurched and we grabbed the back of a seat for support. Swiftly, I took in the scene on the platform. Len and Thomas were sprinting toward the train. Myra had clapped her hand over her mouth and was clutching Jerome's arm.
Elizabeth had a horrified look on her face.
Sarah Jane came to life first and grabbed my hand.
Come on, Mabel. We've got to get off.
By now, the train was obviously moving, for all the people outside the windows were disappearing from view. Sarah Jane stopped at the end of the car. The gate was closed.
Go on to the next one,
I urged her.
Don't stop here.
I have a feeling that the next car is going as fast as this one is, she said. We might as well stay here.
Colleen had raced down the aisle behind us. They aren't going to let you off now, she said. Come on back and sit down.
I don't want to sit down,
I said frantically.
We can't go to Chicago.
Sarah Jane took my hand again.
Standing here and howling out the door isn't going to keep you from it,
she said reasonably. The wheels bumped and clattered as the train gathered speed.
Besides, you're going to be sitting down whether you want to or not. We may as well take a seat as be thrown to the floor.
We followed Colleen back to where Lorenzo sat, his shoulders shaking with laughter. He attempted to straighten his face and look serious as we settled down across from them, but he wasn't very successful. I stared glumly at the red plush seats that had looked so fancy when we first got on the train.
What do they do with stowaways on trains?
Sarah Jane wondered.
Do they have to wash dishes in the dining car?
Probably shovel coal for the engine,
I said.
They're not going to make anyone stoke the furnace who isn't bigger than the shovel,
Colleen observed.
They'll just let you pay for a ticket.
I looked at her bleakly.
With what? Elizabeth is holding my pocketbook.
Mine too,
Sarah Jane said.
But it wouldn't make any difference. I don't have enough money in it to pay for a trip to Chicago.
The train stopped several times before Chicago. Lorenzo signed to Colleen. They can get off at the first stop and take the next train back.
Fine.
Sarah Jane shrugged when Colleen relayed the message.
If we can find someone headed north who will let us carry their bags on board, we'll arrive back in North Branch as we left it, penniless and beholden to the railroad company. Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
I wailed.
I can't be gone overnight. I have a baby to feed and put to bed.
So have I,
Sarah Jane said.
but Mrs. Williams isn't going to let those babies starve, and they'll sleep anywhere. There is no train going through North Branch until morning, no matter what time we get off this one. I say we should sit back and enjoy the trip. I sat back, but I couldn't say I was enjoying it, not even when the conductor chuckled and offered a solution. Don't worry, ladies, it happens all the time. You can pay your station master for a round-trip ticket when you get back. Round trip from where?
Sarah Jane wanted to know.
What is your first stop? Kalamazoo, ma'am. 9 o'clock tonight.
We'll have lots of food,
Colleen said cheerfully.
We can have a party before you leave us. I don't care if I ever eat again,
I grumbled.
Sarah Jane, we're almost 23 years old. Why are we still getting into these situations?
Some folks are just lucky, I guess. Think how many people don't have a thing to tell their grandchildren. And don't worry, you'll eat again. You always get hungry when you're frustrated.
End of chapter 1.